This is Earl White, real estate attorney. This is a video about the top 5 reasons that landlords in New Jersey need to move to evict a non-paying tenant quickly rather than attempting to negotiate a payment plan or cash for keys or some other method, jumping right to the eviction process. First reason is when there is a historical pattern and practice by the tenant of paying rent late. The reason is that paying rent late, it's frustrating for the landlord. It's frustrating for a property manager if you have one. And it's going to keep zapping your time, energy, and obviously that's money you could be paying bills with or putting to other costs while it's coming in late. So it can be frustrating to have the habitual late payment. Second reason that you may strongly consider moving to evict for non-payment when there's habitual late payment is that evicting for habitual late payment itself is very difficult, because for habitual late payment, that is grounds for eviction, but typically you have to give them proper notice first. And that's played out. What's proper notice? At least our firm, the way we would do it, we would serve one formal written notice, all mail tracking and identifying that they are late on rent and it's habitual late payment. Ultimately, you'll get evicted for this. And we'll send a second notice. So essentially one warning, second final warning, and then move to evict for habitual late payment of rent. But that is much more complicated and time consuming than just evicting for non-payment and delinquency, which you don't even have to give notice to courts in New Jersey. So if there's a historical pattern, good reason to, rather than trying to give notice after notice about their late pattern before you can establish the grounds for eviction, you already got the grounds to go to court now for the non-payment. Reason number 2, the rent amount they owe exceeds their ability to pay. So if a tenant is 1 month behind on rent and they've regularly been paying, most likely it may be pointless to go to court, because in New Jersey, the law is that the tenant can come even on the rent prior to the court and the sheriff removing the tenant. So if they're like a month behind on rent and they have a decent income, more likely than not, we can go file an eviction complaint, go to court. We can schedule a court date. We can win the court date. But before the sheriff will go lock out, the tenant can still come even on rent. So if this tenant's got the ability to pay, then jumping to eviction may not be the best idea. But if the amount they owe is 2 or 3 months, and historically they have a pattern and they're delinquent and they don't seem like they have much prospects, then by all means, going to court to move to evict for non-payment of rent probably makes sense, rather than letting this thing, just your investment, not collect any rent. That's time to get this eviction process started. Next reason is if there's other problematic behaviors. Non-payment of rent eviction is the simplest black and white way to evict a tenant. If a tenant has other problematic behaviors, for example, disturbing drug use, disturbing other tenants in a building if there are any, delinquent late payment like we talked about, smoking, pets, any other behavior that you find problematic in breach of a lease if you have one, and if it's month to month, even more reason you would want to pursue this, then at that point, evicting for all those breaches of the leases is very difficult. It's a longer process, more legal notices. And one thing to be aware of in New Jersey, how much legal notice and warning do you have to give? That's a vague standard. You have to give a reasonable notice to cure the behavior. And what that amount is, 2 weeks, is it a month, is it 2 months? That's a judge-specific, fact-specific question. So it's a vague standard there. Non-payment of rent, black and white standard. So there's no dispute. You go to court. If they don't have the money, then case is going in your favor. All these other grounds are harder to evict. So if they're breaching the lease, other problematic behaviors, you want to get rid of them for those alone, and you can't do it because the legal path is too hard for those breaches of the lease. You have the non-payment here, go to court on that, get them out for that reason, and you get the bonus that you don't have to deal with the other headaches. First of all, you have to know your city, but many cities have rent control, and rent control means that you can only increase the rent by a certain percentage each month. So that might be 3%, that might be 4%, that might be 5% if you have applicable rent control. If you have a really low rent, 3% of a small number or 4% or 5% of a small number is a very, very small increase. And you have an opportunity here, and you do have to take a look at your rent control laws to see what the rules are upon changing a vacancy, because it can be different in each city. That what happens when a tenant leaves, you still can't, you have to talk to the rent control department to see what the policies and practices are under the rent control guidelines. So that's a warning. But many cities, if you can kick them out and there aren't such guidelines where if you can remove a tenant for non-payment and you can bring in a new tenancy, then you can come back in at market rate with the new tenant. Again, check your rent control laws. But that's one reason. Low rent in New Jersey, you can sometimes get by rent control by removing them for not paying what they have. Second reason is not just rent control. Even if you're not rent controlled in New Jersey, any rent increase has to be considered reasonable. And we have separate videos about what is reasonable, but the courts will look at the magnitude of the increase. They'll look at the market rents, the person's ability, how long they've been at the unit, and the profitability of the building. So you can only increase the rent, not automatically to the market. So if you have a very low paying tenant and the rent is $2,000 less than the market rent, you can't just jump up there. You could propose it to the tenant, but if the tenant refuses, you cannot win an eviction case if the rent increase is unreasonable. You can skip this whole debate, reasonable, unreasonable, just skip it. They're not paying rent, evict. You don't have to go down this question of rent increases and how much you can do each year for it to still be considered reasonable. So again, if your tenant has a really low rent, just push forward to the eviction for non-payment. And then you get the benefit of, maybe you'll lose rent. I'm trying to negotiate some payment plan with them, but you will gain rent in the long run because now you have the opportunity to just shoot up to the market. Last reason, non-payment in New Jersey is I won't say very fast, but it is a faster process than other forms of eviction. So you have this tenant not paying rent, you're just losing money every month on taxes, insurance, mortgage payments if you have any. So you're just losing money and not collecting rent while this tenant's not paying. New Jersey does have compared to other grounds for evictions, non-payment, you don't have to serve any notices. So you can literally just go file your non-payment eviction case right away. It's usually fairly affordable if you use a law firm, $1,000 ballpark, $1,200 law firms probably charge, but it's not exorbitant where if you go to court on it and somehow they come even on rent, that is absolutely backbreaking. So it's a pretty quick process. You don't need to file a complaint. You can file, you don't need to serve any notices, file your complaint, get your court date scheduled. If they're still not even, get them evicted. But if you could, rather than sitting around negotiating with them for 2-3 months and just end up in the same place, quick process, get the complaint filed. And the advantage there too is if you go to court quick, maybe if they are going to straighten their act out and start coming even on rent, then that eviction complaint will be something to scare them straight, where they're like, hey, now this is serious, right? Now I'm going to go before a judge, so I better start responding to my landlord, responding to their attorneys, putting together a serious plan, or just coming even. And the landlord, you may even just play hardball, be like, hey, look, we're not negotiating anything. You're either going to come up with the rent or we're going to see you in court. Okay, that's the top 5 reasons you need to go to court. To recap: tenant historical pattern of paying late. 2, the delinquent rent exceeds their ability to pay. 3, they have other problematic behaviors, breaches of the lease, any other behavior not related to the non-payment of rent, that this gives you an avenue to resolve. 4, they already have low rent, so getting rid of them for non-payment gives you the opportunity to reset the rent at closer to a market. And then 5, New Jersey, this is the fastest way and cleanest, most black and white way to get rid of a tenant.